We now open Plenary Session 8 on the critical subject of the acceptance and receptivity of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Without further ado, I now call upon our esteemed speakers. Our first speaker, Mr. Eddie Lee, Executive Director, Human Development Organization, Singapore. Mr. Lee proudly calls himself a transformational strategist, a disruptor, and a thought leader. He is a certified master career coach and an expert in the areas of organizational development, change and workforce management, employee and industrial relations, corporate social responsibility, ethics and compliance, to name a few. A big round of applause. Our second speaker is Ms. Bindu Janardhanan, partner, Squire Patton Boggs, Singapore. Ms. Bindu is an experienced legal professional in cross-border business and commercial litigation. Her specialties include government negotiations, dispute resolutions, brand protection, and product liability and claims. A big round of applause. The third speaker is Ms. Amira Budiano, attorney, Kyndryl, Singapore. Ms. Amira is a specialist for data privacy matters within the ASEAN legal team. Her experience includes data protection advisory and handling data breach investigations by the PDPC. She is a seasoned expert for advising SMEs on IP strategy and commercialization. A big round of applause. Our fourth speaker would be Mr. Sameer Gehlot, National Internet Exchange of India. Mr. Gehlot is an expert public policy professional with interest in areas such as emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and fintech. He contributes with his expertise towards building a sustainable digital future. Mr. Sameer would also be the moderator for this session. Applause. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our experts. We are eager to hear their thoughts and recommendations on how we can further promote diversity, ensure equity, and champion inclusion within our organization and community and society at large. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. At the outset, let me begin by thanking the ICSI for allowing me to moderate this session, focusing on the acceptance and receptivity of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is pivotal in building the main theme, which is building resilient and sustainable economies. Namaskar, namaste, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, my esteemed colleagues and the participants present here, as well as joining online from India. At the outset, I would like to inform that I'm fascinated as to how this inaugural session is designed, depicting equal participation in terms of different stakeholders as well as diversity, the bedrock on which this particular theme is designed. This particular concept is not new, as we were discussing during this theme about the ESG and how to build the resilient economies. These concepts are the foundational principles, which earlier, before yesterday, we were talking about this big elephant, which is ESG. But what about the small key components which can hamper the peace for the elephant, inclusivity, diversity, and equity? As we are all aware as to how we can hamper the peace for the big elephant, it is quintessential to discuss about these issues which plague our society. We can find the roots of these concepts in our Indian Constitution under Part 3, Article 14 to 18, which deals with the right to equality. Since we are sitting in Singapore, it's also relevant to pinpoint the relevant provisions in the Singapore Constitution, which are Part 4, of the Constitution of the Republic of Singapore, which deals with the fundamental liabilities. Going further, under the Indian Companies Act, we have Section 149, which deals with the composition of the board of directors, wherein we need to have at least one women director on the board for certain specified companies. Now, without going into much detail, let me introduce my fellow panelists. I will allow them to introduce themselves for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and then we can begin with the panel discussion. Let me begin with Mr. Eddie.
Hi everyone, my name is Eddie. So I wear multiple hats. So one of the hat today I'm represented is the ASEAN Human Development Organization. So it's a charter that is under the ASEAN Secretariat. So we are advocating on human development in the workplace. So that is the area that we are actually focusing in. And the framework that we're actually adopting is actually from the sustainability, the United Nations Sustainability Development Framework. So you can see that under the framework, I think about 18 of the pillars, one of it is actually gender equity as well. So anyway, today we are talking about DEI. I would say that DEI has been there for many, many years, and one of the latest evolution of that is also including the word B. So it's actually DEIB. B stands for belonging. So we can go a little bit to talk a little bit more about belonging as well later on as one of the Q&A questions, but that is one of the things that that has been already evolving. So other hats I'm playing, I'm also wearing as a HR professional. So in my previous life, I was the regional CHRO covering Asia Pacific, 24 countries, including India as well. So I'm very familiar with what is happening in India as well. So that was my job. And I'm also an advisor to quite a number of startups community in Singapore as well. So like my latest one was I was helping some of the Korean company that's trying to incorporate and trying to like how they could do business in Singapore and in ASEAN. Yeah, so that's some of my jobs that I'm doing.
Now, I would like Ms. Bindu to introduce herself and help us in identifying issues which she think would be relevant for the further discussion.
Thank you, Samir. My name is Bindu Janardhanan. I'm from Squire Pattern Box. I've been practicing with the firm for almost 15 years now. Prior to moving to Singapore, I've been in Hong Kong for about 17 years. And I don't think anybody can talk about diversity than more than I could, because I moved from India to Hong Kong to Singapore, and I practice in an American law firm, and that says it all. So thank you so much for ICSI for inviting me to give my thoughts. Thank you, Samir. I'm looking forward.
Yeah, Ms. Samira, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, a very good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Amira and I'm from Kyndryl. So I'm currently an in-house counsel, and previously I was practicing in a Singapore law practice. So when you heard my introduction, that was basically what I did when I was in my law firm when I left almost 3 years ago. So today I'm in Kyndryl, which is a US company. It's an IT company. We traditionally do managed services, but we do a whole lot more now. India is a really huge market for us. We've got 1/3 of our workforce there. I was telling Samir that we've got 30,000 people there. We're considered a startup because we spun off from IBM almost 2+ years ago. And what I do as a general lawyer is, apart from managing the operations in my region, which is ASEAN, and I particularly focus on Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, I also work with my colleagues in the APAC, Middle East, Africa, MEA region, and that includes India. I'm also part of the team that does compliance. So I've worked with colleagues in India for our integrity summits that we conduct there, because obviously India is a very big population, and we need to really drive the message forward regarding integrity and everything else that comes under. So back over to you, Samir, so we can get the session started.
Yeah, thank you. So this topic is also relevant at a time, like we all are aware that the pandemic was one such event wherein everything came to a standstill position. But due to the digital technology, we were able to tide up with the impacts of the pandemic, which is like evident in the Indian government stand. The Economic Survey 2020 to 2021 was talked about how the digital economies were the sprint runner that enabled us to tide over the disruptive effect of the pandemic. And these advances in remote sensing, automation, digitization, information management ecosystem, text mining, and other related AI models and LLMs are relevant, and their optimal utilization can be tackled by focusing on the issues which we will be discussing going forward. And like Mr. Eddy was highlighting about the work which he's currently doing for the SDGs, there is this zero draft also which is released by the United Nations, wherein they would be revisiting the SDG goals, which were earlier set up discussed or reviewed in 2015. They would be discussing the SDGs due to certain problems, like we were unable to catch up with the current estimates in the Summit of the Future in Washington, D.C. in September 2024. Now, due to the paucity of the time and without delaying further, I would start with the questions and a panel discussion. My first question is for Bindu. How do regulatory frameworks and the policies influence the implementation of DEI across different regions and industries? Since you were mentioning that you have worked in different regions, how do you think that?
I think regulatory, is one of the most pivotal, requirement in driving something like DEI. Because, as you know, how did it all start? If you look at there was a particular legislation which started in America, which sort of dealt with the civil rights movement, and which was the Title VII. Now, it all started at that point when we said that, okay, when the US government said that we need to have some sort of a legislation which kind of prohibits people from discriminating against race and, by color or, whatever that comes with that. So I think regulatory framework, from there, it started trickle down to then Australia started having their own, legislation, and so is India right now with the POSH Act that was in I think it was legislated sometime 2020, yeah. So I think these frameworks really gives people, the comfort that they require in driving something like DEI. Yeah.
And considering the fact, like after the pandemic, digital technologies were frequently used for communicating, and so things which were relevant in the physical environment are like currently being relevant, not even relevant, like much more important for the digital environment also.
True.
So in order to handle that, Eddie, how do you think you define diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of the theme, and what role does this play in the overall ecosystem development?
Okay, I think first of all, when you talk about DEI, agree that it comes from the civil rights and all those things from the US, and even in the United Nations, we have been talking a lot about that. But I would say that when it comes to Asia, I think one of the things that at HDO, okay, ASEAN Human Development Organization, we ask the question, what are we trying to drive? So I think it's very important that we ask ourselves the objective, so that when we have our members or we have companies that come up to us for advice, we also will challenge them to ask, why are they trying to drive certain things they are driving? Like, example, ESG. Why are they driving ESG? I think just now I hear from the morning session that there's a lot of conversation around the why, the objectives, which is very important, because if we do not know, then everything that we do is going to be just a paper exercise, and it's going to waste a lot of our time. So how does it actually bring values to the organization? How are we going to help the company to make more profits by being ESG certified and so forth? And then how are we going to get how are we going to have a sustainable economy and likewise a sustainable world as well? So coming back to the whole thing, I will also look at in terms of ASEAN as well. We are still a very young economy. I would say that as compared to the US, compared to the Europe. So even in this area of the ESG, we are still relatively infant on that. But I would say that we are actually drawing a lot of our knowledge, the experience from our fellow counterparts in other world, and then we actually reflect into Asia and how we will customize it in Asia. So I would say that back to us, we have to ask ourselves the question, why are we doing, like example, what are we trying to advocate? We talk about gender equality. So why are we trying to talk about gender equality? So I would say that in all these things, I actually take home the one thing that I learned is we are actually having a diversity of thoughts. Because in some company, they can still follow the framework, but what happens is that they can hire, they can hire the different gender, but all having the same thoughts. Does it really create diversity? The answer is no. So what I'm trying to say is that when we are trying to drive the framework or the regulations or even the reporting part of it, we should actually really try to understand the objectives of why are we doing the DEI. Otherwise, it goes back to we may be hiring the different gender, hiring the different demographic of people, but we are forcing them to align to our same thoughts, and then there is no diversity. So it's actually trying to drive the whole thing about diversity of thoughts. So that is probably something that I just want to share.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. Anyone in the audience would like to explain what, according to them, is diversity, inclusion, and equity, if anyone would like to make it like an interactive session? Anyone? Yeah.
How can the company secretary contribute to form the board with different diversified knowledge composed in the board? Is there anything, any process that the company secretary, what we are talking here for the composition of the board is most important for smoothly running and ensure sustainability of a company. So how can a company secretary contribute to composition of a board with diversified knowledge?
Yeah, we will get back to you shortly. Like it's mentioned in one of the questions, but my question was if anyone would like to mention what the term diversity, inclusion, and equity stands for.
Since you said it could be on a lighter note, being invited to a disco on a weekend is diversity, and actually hitting the dance floor is inclusion.
Yeah, perfectly, aptly described. Now, the going further, my question is to the Amira. Like you are working in the legal and the compliance field. From a legal and the compliance standpoint, what do you think? Which kind of infrastructure investment are necessary to support this kind of initiative in the overall ecosystem?
So I'm going to start with giving a step at what I understand DE and I, or what I usually call ID and E, doesn't matter which order you use. So these concepts or definitions are based on what my organization adopts. So I means to us a culture where employees feel a sense of inclusion and belonging. D is to attract and develop and retain diverse talent across levels and geographies. We operate in 63 countries. We're a US company. It's inevitable that a lot of our thinking is very US centric. It's very much shaped by what US legislations are, or what the SEC may require, because we're a New York Stock Exchange listed company. But we want to make a concerted effort to ensure that we look at across geographies. E is to cultivate opportunity and promote equity in underserved communities. So it's not just about pay equity. That's good. How do we achieve pay equity beyond internal organization and what we can do, right? It's also where we can do more community engagement and advocacy. So from a legal perspective, Bindu talked about, all these legislations, and I can't say any further with respect to the legal framework or from a legal perspective, what else you can do, because sometimes it's out of your hands. But what I feel you can do from a compliance standpoint is, because compliance is not really just about you comply with the law or you comply with what is good, right? I think if you go deeper into this, ask yourself, what is compliance? At the heart of it, compliance is doing the right thing, is doing the ethical thing. But what does doing the right thing mean? It can mean very differently for people with different values, for people with different missions and purposes. However, if your organization does not have a clear idea of what it means to do the right thing and how do you get there, the responses, if at all, may be very not standardized and may not necessarily be aligned with what the organization in itself thinks is considered to be compliance, right? And how does that connect to DEI or ID&E? So to me, it's very fundamental. It's not very obvious when we talk about compliance. Of course, you comply with the law. That connection is obvious. But what does compliance have got to do with ID&E? So think of it this way. You have people in this room who think very differently. Even everybody here is thinking very differently. We may share certain thoughts, but we don't necessarily think the same way. And definitely look at our backgrounds, we're totally very different. I'm local, but I'm also a minority in this country. So sometimes I don't fit in the way I think, even with the next minority, right? So without the diversity of thought and openness or inclusivity to these thoughts, right, what's gonna happen is people in the organization will be like, I think that's wrong, but you know what, my thoughts don't matter. I'm not going to speak up, or why should I speak up? Because no one's listening, they don't care. In fact, it's gonna look even worse because I'm not thinking the same way as everybody else. And that is going to be a risk from a compliance perspective. We have people who are not speaking up, the compliance risks and gaps are not addressed. So it is creating a culture at the end of the day, right? I think it's a lot more nuanced here. So it's about creating a culture, and you need to support that as an organization, wherever you are, even as a company secretary, and whether you belong to a specific function or whether you're just sitting on the board as a, you are from an external organization and you come in as the outsourced company secretary. So that's my take on compliance and
So
what.
since you're talking about the compliance, in India, we have this mandatory requirement to have one women director for certain specified companies. And while I was talking with Bindu, she was mentioning that even though there was no law in Singapore, but her company has 42% composition of women director on the board, which is a very big thing. So Bindu, would you like to highlight the untapped potential in this DEI initiative? If like there is no law, but what if you can voluntarily do that? What lies underneath?
Just to add to what Amara just said about, what is diversity, right? When we talk about, it's a very simple, it's a very simple definition that it's absolutely uniquely accepting who the other person is on the other side based on their race, culture, wherever they come from. Now, as Squire Patent Box in our firm, what we did was that we took this as a very strategic, we took a very strategic approach on DEI. So when I say strategic, like as Sameer said, right before the panel started, we were discussing about what is the objective, what are we driving through this strategic approach. So the firm decided right from beginning that we would have a lot more women in powerful roles, so which is when our board of, our global board consists of 42% of women. So what happens by that is, as a young associate, when you're joining, you're seeing all these people up there who are change drivers. And automatically, there is a culture that is just permeated around the firm. So in my view, I think that has played a very big role. And as I said, we take this very seriously. So we have, there is a certification process, as you know, of which is called the Mansfield certification process for DEI, which you have to go through a certain parameters, and then you get the certification. It's a very arduous thing to get that. So the firm does, we've got it like twice in a row, which is also an indicator that we are ticking all the boxes. So there are several things that's taken, we participate on. We have 44 offices around the world. So definitely there are different culture, different diversified women, or everybody around there. So we have to cater to everyone. So I think that the fact that you have, it's a thought leadership. It comes from above. So when you have the leadership very focused on on something like this, I think it permeates further down. Yeah.
Yeah, based on what you are mentioning, Eddie, your organization is currently working with certain accreditation like Head Start and Ahead accreditation. Like, how are they relevant for this topic, and what would be the outcome if I personally decide to undergo such certifications?
Right. So the certification, we don't specifically mention about DEI per se. That means it's not the main focus or the only focus, or rather the focus is about human development in the workplace, whereby we talk about the S part in the ESG. So that's why the whole framework is actually much more comprehensive, and DEI is only a portion of that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, DEI is one of the issue. There are certain other issues which are correlated with that, like meaningful accessibility, and misinformation, disinformation, which all of them work in tandem with each other. So now my next question is to Amira. What do you think? Why businesses, especially startups, should ensure that their operation should abide with the DEI compliant? Like, what's your thought on that?
So I started off explaining that I work in a large company that is also a startup. So we're just gonna tap on this. So we came from a company that has like 100-plus-year-old legacy with very enshrined processes, very set ways of thinking. So when we came out, right, as our own brand, our own identity, we start to think, what do we want to do? How do we want the market to recognize us apart from our competitors in the very competitive IT industry, right? And so one, especially startups, this is a way for you to distinguish yourselves from your competitors. It's a way for you to distinguish yourself as you enter the market, right? Investors love it, but you want to do it for yourselves, because why else did you even want to start the startup in the very first place, right? Because you have an interesting idea, an interesting concept. You think there is a gap in the market. You want to fill that gap, right? But how do you stand out? So you create a brand that's going to help you with the branding, but also more importantly, I think today, and Bindu, maybe you may also have some thoughts about when you hire talents, right? When you want to hire talents, they're not looking at just the pay today. They're also looking at, does this organization have something special? Are they going to think that what I think is important, and they want to listen to what I have to say, right? If you look at the younger talents workforce, that's what they're looking at. They want to be involved, they want to feel included, right? So I think definitely there's so many positives as to why you should ensure that your operations embed that. And I think I just want to touch a bit more on the reputational part.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think just using a case example where my organization is. So, Eddie talked about ESG, and I'm sure when you have code of conducts or business conduct guidelines or something along the lines, right? You say, this is my code of conduct. Everybody's got to follow it. I'm sure you've got a section on ESG. Who has a section on ESG in their code of conduct? Okay, I see nods. It's okay, you don't have to raise your hand. It's a Saturday afternoon, I got you. But I think what comes through today is that in that section, little section that I have this in my code of conduct, right? It talks about including, promoting an inclusive and equitable workforce through our own internal strategy on IDE and in our supply chain. So we have a supplier diversity program even, and I think it goes beyond just telling your employees, you have to promote ID&E, join this program, that program, but also ensuring that we work with people who are also like-minded. So I think for startups and businesses, when you think about this, look at it from the perspective that when you embed it, you get more opportunities to work with people who are looking for an organization like you that have the same mentality.
Yeah, building on that, Bindu, what do you think? What kind of advancement you would require in this ecosystem to take this way beyond the expectations which are set through the ESG guidelines? Like,
Right, just to add on to what Amara just said about, it's just not about setting a process and to see how it actually works, right? So, in what we've done in our firm is, we have, as you know, lawyers, our lives are defined by the hours that we bill. The billable numbers is the biggest thing for us. So, in order to drive that, we also have something called as a pro bono work, which is very dedicated to DEI initiatives. So, this just drives someone to take on more work which is related to DEI. This is some way we make sure that there is a process and you can also make use of that process. Now, coming back to your question, Samir, I think it's, as I said, it is something which needs to be driven from above. So in order to make it more in order to make it more solidify, or if I may say that, it is that you need to champion diversity at the leadership level. And that's how I think we have looked at it, yeah.
Coming on the leadership level, like currently the environment is bifurcated into the physical world and the digital world. In order to ensure inclusiveness in the digital world, there is this initiative which is known as UA, Universal Acceptance. Universal acceptance is something like the websites can easily be translated into any of the languages using the APIs. But what about the URL? Any idea, like, for example, if I know Hindi or I know my native language, but I can't access the URL in English language, then the government is working with this initiative in order to make the internet truly multilingual. How they are doing this is they are allocating the websites in the native languages. Through that, if a person who knows Hindi or if a person who knows any of the languages of their nations, they can easily access their particular websites. Without that, you might be aware of the particular location where you want to go, but you are not aware of the address, or you are not able to access the URL. So through this universal acceptance initiative, we are working to make the internet truly multilingual. Now, coming on Eddie, Eddie, what do you think, like, given the India's prominent position as an emerging global leader, especially in the APAC region, currently it's home to one of the world's largest population. What do you think would be the right approach going forward for companies or the startups or certain other entities to build a resilient and sustainable economy?
Okay, so let me reflect based on my experience with ASEAN first. Okay, so because my experience is about ASEAN and also Asia Pacific. So another question or another thing that I also link up with is also based on my interaction with a lot of startups, a lot of companies as well. And when I talk to the business leader, they always ask the question, whether is it ESG, whether is it DEI. They ask, why do we need to do DEI? Why? Does it make any business sense, or is it just for show? Correct. So how does it actually help them to make do business? How do they help them to make more money? So my answer to them is very simple. The world is evolving. The world have half the population of male and female. So if you only focus on hiring the senior leaders who are only the male, you only target only 50% of the world population. So how about the other 50% of the, you are trying to sell your product to your customer, right? And you only have all the males in your board that are all males that only understand how the male thinks. So your product is very much actually tilted towards just the male. How about the female? So you lose the 50% of the market share. So the only way for you to actually make money and try to get as much as possible is you also should understand the female. And how can you understand female if your board doesn't have female? So that is a very easy way for me to bring the message across to the leaders that why you should have diversity. Because you want to make money, right? And you cannot just focus on only one group of people. You want to have as many group of people. So the only way for you to attack, okay, as many group of people as possible is to have that group of people join your board, that you understand the thinking process, so that you can craft a strategy to actually support you to reach out to that group of people. So I think that is the easiest way for me to explain to the business leader. And it makes sense for them to support why they need to do diversity and inclusion. So now that is how I actually been advocating a lot in ASEAN. And now back to India, I would say that, again, we all know that India is the biggest population for quite some time already. Yeah, and I'll say that and India is known as the largest democratic country in the world, correct? And there is a lot of things that we all can learn from each other. Of course, every country we have our good points and we have our downside. But what I say there is that we all have to come together and look at it. Why are we actually doing DEI for the country, for the companies? So what are we trying to advocate? So whether is it from a national country perspective or whether is it from a business perspective, I think we really need to ask ourselves the question why. Then we're able to craft a more meaningful strategy to actually address, to support that. I'll say that there is a lot of opportunities in India. And likewise, I'll say that India is actually a very diverse country. Okay, even though, yeah, mainly is Indian, right? But there is so many ethics in that as well. So there is a lot of things that we can actually learn, whether is it India learning from ASEAN or learning from the rest of the world. Likewise, we also can learn from India as well. So I would say that there is a lot of opportunity of cross-exchange as well.
Now, coming on the part to embrace the diversity, inclusivity in the era of digitization, AI models are developed on the database, which are not little bit, but they are biased. What's your thought on that, Bindu? Like the AI models and the work which you are doing at your company, like any take on that?
Well, as lawyers, you know, the first thing that we hate hearing is AI. We just don't want to hear that word, but it's inevitable. Well, I do think that, you know, it is AI models. It would be interesting to see how it evolves, actually, to be honest. Right now, the way I see it, you know, it is making you know, a lot of big changes. There could be a lot of good changes that can come with it, but I'm really not very certain how that would proceed.
It would be interesting to
Yeah.
would be interesting to see you in your case, especially reason being the board in your company comprises 42% with gender diversity. So
Right.
that would be something we can look forward to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now coming to another question for Amira. Are there any specific initiative or the projects or certain other initiatives which your organization is involved in to support this cause, or through which we can have a takeaway for the audience as well as for the online participants which are sitting in India?
So maybe I'll give two examples. So the first is this, right? In line with the whole rebranding, et cetera, that we talked about. So in my organization, we have created this company-sponsored, but it's basically led by the employees. And basically, it's a little bit of a mix, you know. In Singapore, I mean, just a segue. So in Singapore, it's always top-down. Right, any initiative is top down. I mean, you try from ground up, but it's very hard because of inertia. So in my organization, we do have a company-sponsored program, but it's all led by individuals and employees who are interested in the respective causes. We call it the Kindle Inclusion Networks, or KINS. And what is that? Is basically, right, if you identify with that cause, whether it's about race, gender, sexual identity, or disability, then, you know, basically it's a safe space for you to talk about issues that pertain to you and your community, as well as to, you know, advance certain projects, right, that you think would be useful in your community. So it goes beyond what we do on a day-to-day basis that, you know, to create profit. You know, by participating in it, you're not just advocating for that community, you're also advocating for yourself, right? You are given the opportunity to have a voice, you use that voice. And, you know, people would turn to KINS to be able to, you know, get valuable resource about whenever they want to do community outreach, when they want to talk about, you know, how do we recruit people that, you know, of a certain profile that we're looking at, because we don't have that, right? As well as, you know, ensuring that this is how we commit to a more inclusive and diverse workplace. So this is all very voluntary, but just you know, it's all categorized to the different groups like Asian American, if you're African American, you're Hispanic, whether you are LGBTQ+, whether you are an indigenous or native person, or whether you are someone with disabilities or neurodiversity even, as well as, you know, if it's specific to that country, race, ethnicity, and of course for women. Of course, the women kin is always, you know, very much subscribed. And I think the other thing that I wanted to also share is from the legal department itself, you know, and some company secretaries are in the legal department, so maybe, you know, this could be applicable to those of you who are in the legal department, or even if you're not in the legal department, you're in a corporate function department, any sort of department, right? So because we're a US company, we joined this this council. It's called Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, LCLD. It's a very US-based thing, but probably, and I don't know this, I'm sorry, I probably should have checked for India and for ASEAN, but you know, you could also do that. This is just an example. So basically, it's an organization of more than 400 corporate chief legal officers and law firms in the US who promote this idea on IDNE leadership. And we pledge to, by joining it, right, we have fellows who join, you know, a program. There's a lot of networking, there's a lot of learning. So it's a very good opportunity with people, like-minded people. And they bring back, so when a company sponsors this, they bring back, right? You have to report back, this is what I've learned, this is what I've exchanged ideas with. And that's how it creates that sustainable growth towards, you know, ensuring we stay committed to the cause. So before I give back to you, Samir, I just want to share one thing, which is my general counsel and corporate secretary. So he's joined this, right? And he has made a commitment. He's made a personal commitment. He's also made an organizational commitment. And that's what you can do when an organization, here being the legal department, or your corporate functions department, and that will be the sphere of direct influence that you can exert, right? If you're, you know, in that position to be able to do that. So in his personal commitment, you know, he champions it by saying, I will drive a culture of inclusion and belonging by modeling inclusive behaviors in my role within Kyndryl, and continuing to learn about diverse communities within Kyndryl by engaging in regular listening sessions with constituents of those communities, fostering active participation in our kin employee events and department programming, and of course to attract and retain diverse talents, and to embed IDNE in itself as a strategy within our department by requiring that his leadership team meets at least 2 other general councils annually to discuss and promote this IDNE program. And from an organizational standpoint, basically everyone in the department is expected to have an IDNE goal in their annual business objectives, and we get like annually reviewed. Our performance review includes this. You know, it's also about encouraging and you know, giving a lot of opportunities to the younger lawyers or those belonging to these different communities to go out there and participate and bring something new to the organization. So my point here is this: you have a company that is generally open to it, right? Then you can drive more traction by actually, you know, making sure that in the sphere of influence that you can exert, you would propagate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a comprehensive and noble initiative by your organization. Eddie, would you like to highlight certain other examples which are there in your organization or which you might have studied to came up with this framework or accreditation like?
Yeah, so talking about that, I think one of the things that we also have a lot of discussion is about ethics. Right, just now I just want to write on the topic about the AI on. So I'm a HR practitioner, and some of the things that we also look through our HR processes. Like one of the things that we look a lot about is talent acquisition. So you know that there is now this application tracking system. You have a lot of this kind of thing. You even can apply AI to actually do the profiling and all this kind of thing. So even within the HR community and even HDO, ASEAN Human Development Organization, we have a lot of debate about that. Is that are we using the technology, the AI, to help us to get better profile, or are we actually discriminating? It's a very thin line. So that is why while we say that we are trying to get a profile that is going to match our needs, but at the same time, we also discriminate people who may not fit into the profile, but maybe they actually can do a better job. We do not know. So it's something that we are debating a lot. And what I'm saying is that within us, we also have a lot of discussion is that how do we mitigate the risk and how do we actually take in consideration of ethics as well, and whether are we trying to put aside a certain group of people, discriminate a certain group of people, or are we actually going to include this group of people? So one of the things that we also try to focus a lot is maybe moving towards to talk about more on skill base, which I think that is an easier way to argue about DEI, okay? The reason is because when I focus on skill, I kind of forget about what is the gender, I forget about what is the age, so long as they can actually deliver the job. So I think that it set everybody on the equitable platform to actually get the job, that kind of thing. So these are some of the things that we actually try to push and try to advocate, which hopefully that it actually makes more business sense for the business leaders.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. On that front, I would like to highlight that recently the United Nations released their AI report, AI for Humanity, wherein they clearly mentioned that the AI should be used for improving the living standard of the people rather than degrading it or maybe like using to create the biases. So they came up with two different reports, one by the Office of the Human Rights on the racial discrimination and AI, and the second one on AI for Humanity. When we club both these reports, you get a clear picture of where we are heading forward. And on that front, I would like to ask one question, Bindu. What are the different issues which your organizations are supporting to create an inclusive environment, and how these initiatives actually help your organization in realizing the vision and the mission with which you are going forward?
So Samir, as I said earlier, there are the issues that we do see on a day-to-day basis comes from the fact that we are very culturally diverse as a firm. With 44 offices around the world, there are a lot of issues which are mostly centric around people. So, we have to make a very conscious decision, conscious effort to address those. So I would say largely the issues that we do come across is related to people. And so for example would be this, that I moved from India to, I can give you a personal example here. I moved from India to Hong Kong. And this was 17 years back, where things were so different. The concept of DEI was not there. The concept of diversity was quite limited. And the firm took an approach that, how are they going to integrate me in the culture there? So the various networking events were organized, and, and this was just for a few people in the organization. And then from there, moving on to Singapore, and when I go and meet various, various colleagues around the world, how do we make them, so if I go wearing a bindi to to one of my offices in Cincinnati, let's say, they are not surprised seeing me like that, because they're very accepting because of the awareness and the education provided by the firm. So we have a lot of access group, committees that we have in the organization. We have a very I think at least 10 different access groups we have, just just addressing any issues that might just come up. Yeah.
Amira, you are well aware of the fact that this conference is for company secretaries. What would be the key takeaways for the company secretaries, and what do you suggest they should embrace to include the culture of DEI within themselves as well as within their organization?
I'm going to stop talking about my company. So another thing that I wanted to share is that I sit on a board for this social service association in Singapore. So it's basically like like an organization that looks after the community's well-being. It goes from like children all the way up to you know, seniors, right? Like active aging and whatever not that we are now focusing on because Singapore is an aging country. And I tell you one of the reasons why I was brought in. I started off being part of a committee, a service committee, it's called. So basically, we look at all the programs that they have and see, you know, what can be done better. These are social workers that run the programs. And what happened is later on they said, oh, we would like you to join the board. And of course, when I first joined the committee, they said, we want to invite you with a view that you would join the board once you're more comfortable and familiar with our organization, because we need to look at diversity. So of course, you know, yay, I get to join a board, being very young and being able to join a board as a female. But then later on, I realized that, you know, one of the reasons why I was given that opportunity compared to maybe somebody else, apart from having the connection, because I knew the person who was making the nomination. We've worked together in other projects in the Law Society. So he knew me, he knew what I was interested in, my passion and my enthusiasm. So I thought about it and I said, oh, okay, so I'm there because I fit the bill. I'm you know, back then I'm a lawyer, practicing lawyer. I'm female, I'm young, and I am in the minority based on my ethnicity. So it's going to make the board look really good. So to me now, when I look at it, right, I realize that, you know, so we have a nominations committee. So I just want to be clear that in some instances, the company secretary may not have the ability to, you know, select or make decisions or even be part of that nominations process because you have a separate nominations committee who looks at it in a more objective way, perhaps. But if you can, as a company secretary, you know, be in that board, sitting in that board, or be part of the position where you could decide who gets to sit on the board and help to make decisions. I think, look at it not just because we're trying to hit a number and then say we're very happy that we have 51% women. I don't think the objective is to be that. It should be because you genuinely think that getting diverse views, right, is helpful for your organization based on what you are doing. That's one. And in my example, because it's doing social service, the beneficiaries and the clients are every person in the community. That's why we need that diversity. So the thinking was because we needed to have someone different, not Chinese and not a guy, but you know, it's more important to understand why. So you can make that change, I think, and you can subtly and hopefully in due course create greater influence to help everybody see that there is tangible benefits, right, from having that diverse board. Yeah, so I think that's really the takeaway here, because you obviously came here today and you agree ID&E is valuable. At least it is a tool that you can use to achieve certain benefits for your organization, but how do you sell that? Yeah.
Yeah, Bindu, so you are the partner in your organization. Like going, rather than doing the compliance or abiding with the laws, how to go beyond that? Or
You know, Samir, when I think about, you know, being a partner or being a leader, one of the most important thing that comes out of that is with, you know, that quote from Superman, right? With great powers comes great responsibilities. So you are at a position where you can change things. And, you know, just by having, as very correctly said, you know, 42% at the global board, what change are you making? But if you're open and if you're able, there are a lot of things you can achieve. And that kind of permeates around your subordinates and going down. I don't know if I answered your question correctly.
yeah.
So.
Eddie, last question to you. Like your courses are there, but what are you thinking or designing courses for the next generation, which will have different challenges going forward? what are you like thinking on that part?
Well, you're asking me, you open a can of worms, okay? So it's a very tough question. So right now we are looking at having 5 generation in the workplace already. So I'm not surprised that as time goes by, we have 6 or 7 generation, okay? Every generation is about a decade. So every generation is actually very different. So I'm actually also very involved in the whole discussion about Gen Y versus Gen Z versus the baby boomers and so forth. So the question is, I always ask the question, why are we trying to segregate the different generations? Okay, why are we trying to say that there's a Gen Y versus a Gen X and versus another generation? Why? I say, are we creating more fight among them by having this kind of question? Shouldn't we be focusing on really saying that, hey, how are we going to work together? How are we trying to understand each other? And how are we going to collaborate with each other? I mean, how can the young learn from the older one? And how can the older one learn from the younger one? And one of the things I'm also trying to advocate a lot is about the older generation. Like example, I'm not that young. Okay, I may look young, but I'm not that young. And I always talk to the to my peers. I say, hey, look, the world belongs to the young people. The world belongs to young people. Why are we trying to make a decision for the future generation? We should be listening to them. We should be guiding them. We should be helping them to actually make decisions for their own future, not us making a decision for them. So I'll say that a lot of things that we are trying to advocate is really to look into the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. What kind of generation, what kind of people are we going to see, and what kind of behavior, and then how are we going to empower them? I don't think that we should be making a decision for them, but we should actually help them to build the kind of capacity, to have build the kind of character, build the kind of ability, competency, whatsoever, to able to lead their own generation. I mean, that is probably my last words I want to share.
Yeah. Thank you. So the key takeaways from this panel discussion, Amira mentioned about the initiative which her organization is running, which is a very comprehensive and inclusive process. Eddie talks about the way he's working to tackle the coming generation with the upcoming challenges and the opportunities which lie ahead. And Bindu talked about how her organization topped in having 42% board composition with different diversity. So that is something which we can learn from this panel discussion. Now I will open the floor for the questions. So if you now you can ask your question. Yeah.
Quite a thought-provoking session. Many thanks to the panel for that. Since we have a couple of people representing the legal fraternity, just wanted to understand what is the response or the perspective that is emerging from the other side, from the bench. How does the judiciary or the regulatory framework or society at large, how receptive are they to diversity in the Far Eastern context?
Anyone would like to answer that question or?
Well, as I said, initially, why do we have these regulatory frameworks, right? I think it just indirectly creates accountability. Now, as far as acceptance is concerned, in the past few years, we have seen that this entire topic has gained so much momentum that it has compelled everybody to take this take this topic seriously enough that we need to have certain frameworks. Now, for example, I do not think in the past we would have thought about certain acts. We have a Fair and Awareness Act, apparently in Singapore, which talks about more how to, or a Harassment Act. These are things, these legislations actually help enhance such initiatives, yeah.
And on the top of that, the Indian government recently came up with legislation wherein they will be placing 33.33% the women composition in the parliament, and it would definitely have a positive impact at the lower level, in the district level, at the national level, and at the organizational level also. So if you want, can you repeat your question, sir?
Can you repeat your question? 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 Can you repeat your question
Yes, thank you. Uh, Thanks to all the panelists, including the moderator, and it was excellent session. Actually, I was asking if the company secretary, company secretary, how can contribute to ensure the DEI and also to ensure the inclusion of the proper diversified knowledge people in the board for the development and smoothly running of the company and sustainability of the company.
Yeah, so I think company secretaries are professional who need to take care of the interest of all the stakeholders. And even if some of us might not be company secretary, but this is what they do. And on the top of that, would you, any one of you would like to answer the question or? Maybe you would like to answer? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so from my perspective, okay, so I would say that regarding company secretaries to the board, I would say that we can look at having some reporting as well. I think there's some of the metrics that we can actually look at it. But again, I would say that let's be very careful about the metrics, not for the sake of just putting the numbers in, but really understand why are we doing that. So even like I would advise company is that, look, what is the right ratio that you want to have? Is it a 50-50 or is it a 60-40? So the company should actually decide based on the business the person is, the company is actually doing. That make more sense. Then the next thing is, I would say the next thing is about education, creating the awareness first. So the board needs to be aware and they need to have a certain level of training as well. This is probably one of the most challenging things because a lot of times at the board level, they think that they're very senior and they think that they do not need the kind of training. Maybe the more junior people would need the training. But I'll say that the training or the awareness should actually start at the board level, and then they have to be the one actually to drive the whole thing. So if the board doesn't drive it, it doesn't flow all the way down, and the whole organization would not actually endorse it at all. So again, you actually have to start from the top, whereby you get the board, then we get the management, the top management to actually support the whole thing and understand. And they have to take ownership of the whole process. And they have to ask the question, why are they supporting it? So I think why I'm also trying to really push it through is to get the leaders to ask the question, why? Because if you don't understand why, it's always wasting the time of doing something.
And this topic is something which is not focused on the company secretaries only. This impact each and every individual, and it is me, you, and we all of us which can create a positive impact through these initiatives, which will help us in growing ourselves as well as and our economies at last. So, any other?
Yes, one
Yeah.
question. In fact, it's not a question. I'll ask a question. This is open to even the audience, okay? So if you can tell me the meaning of the question, what I actually meant, then that is the answer for it. So I'll make a statement, okay? Unless you die, you cannot live. What do I mean by that? Anybody?
Anyone?
Unless you die, you cannot live or survive.
I think it's about the challenges which you take in your journey.
No, it is the topic which we discussed.
So
D stands for diversity.
yeah,
I is inclusion.
yeah,
E is
equity.
equity. So unless you do this, you cannot survive. That's what I mean.
Okay, thank you, thank you for the discussion. Now we conclude this panel discussion, and over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for your insights, dear speakers. We hope that there are more such open discussions on this crucial subject to enable DE&I turn into a major component in all corporate landscapes. CS Samir has asked questions which have beautifully brought out some varied aspects of DE&I. As Ms. Amira rightly mentions, that a culture needs to be created to help this concept evolve to its full bloom. It was a good point mentioned by Ms. Bindu here, when she gave pro bono cases a DEI perspective, which all lawyers can definitely make use of. As crux of the whole session, and as pointed out by Mr. Lee, the why is an important question which all corporates need to ask themselves and introspect before they call themselves inclusive, diverse, and equitable. We are very grateful to each one of you. We would now like to give the mementos, for which I would call upon our chairman, CS Nitish, and committee member, CS Shailesh, to please present the mementos. Thank you. A big round of applause, please.